Hey, it's me, Nalthazar, and welcome to another episode of Achieving Perfection. This is going to be for the Azor the Lawbringer node in Battle of the Four Tribes Part 2. Now, I'm going to be making an Achieving Perfection video for a few of the nodes in this particular part of the event. I'm going to be making them based on requests from some of my subs and from people in the community that I'm a part of. I've been getting a lot of requests for very specific nodes here, just because it's a pretty tough part of the event, especially for newer players. So the deck that I would suggest for newer players would be something kind of like this. And then the deck that I would suggest for players who have pretty much everything, like the substantial collection, is something more like this. Now, if you can't make either of these decks, don't worry. At the end of the video, I'm actually going to be going over how I'd go about deck building for the event. So let's just jump right into what is the node, what do we need to do? So Azor the Lawbringer here, as you can see on the right, is level 200. It's got 436 health, massive mana gains, has 3 abilities. So the first ability is going to be for Azor to draw 2 cards and gain 2 life. Azor is very rarely going to use that ability. He's also got Sphinx's Renewal, which is going to return the last support from their graveyard to their hand and give it full mana. And then the third ability, Supreme Verdict, is going to exile all of your opponent's creatures. So Supreme Verdict, I find that comes out against me pretty regularly. That's the one that Azor tends to go for against me. But it's just something to keep in mind for removal, really. So your objectives for this fight are going to be to win the fight, to cast 4 or more supports that cost 12 or less, and to create 12 or more creature tokens during the fight. Now, the deck itself that Azor is running is not particularly terrifying. There aren't really any big bombs in it. The one thing to really be careful of is Willbreaker, because for some reason, Willbreaker keeps coming up in like bugs where if it steals one of your creatures, it crashes your game. So like it's been one that's like come and gone for over a year now, right? So that's the only thing that's really there to really look out for. Now, Thematic Compass is kind of a pain in the butt. So it's a support and it's a land. So it starts out as an artifact and then it becomes a land, and it is ultimately going to be flipping, right? So here's the Thematic Compass. It flips. It's got 5 shields when it flips, and at the beginning of your turn, convert 2 gems to loyalty, which is whatever. But while this support is on the battlefield, your opponent's first creature has its power reduced to 0. So this is a righteous pain, especially for newer players, because one of your best defenses is to make some kind of vigilant or defending creature that will block your opponent's things and kill them. And Spires of Erazga kind of neuters that. So you definitely need to make sure that you're going to be running support removal for this node, new player or not, just because it stops you up. Something fierce, like having no fiber in your diet. It's bad. And then the other card that's kind of annoying is the Immortal Sun. Now, this is a reward. This is a reward from this event. So if you've done this event before, that's going to be really good for you, because this card is very useful for one of the other nodes. But basically, it makes it so that neither Planeswalker can use any of their loyalty abilities. So you're probably going to want to get rid of this, because Azor's abilities aren't entirely terrifying. Or maybe Azor gets this thing down and you're like, you know what? I really don't care. I've got the lead, and it just means that Azor is not going to Supreme Verdict me or something, so I'm kind of okay with that. So just keep that in mind. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that if you are destroying the supports, that Gadgeteer can bring them back. So ideally, you have things that can destroy multiple supports, but if you don't, it's not the end of the world. So the other thing to keep in mind for this particular node is it does have one of these perma support things, and this is nasty. So it only affects you. It does not affect Azor. And so it cycles between 3 abilities. So every turn, it changes its ability, kind of like a saga. And the first ability is your opponent's creature, so basically your creatures, gain can't attack until the beginning of your next turn. So 1 in every 3 turns, your creatures cannot attack. The second one is spells in your hand become disabled until your next turn. So every 3 turns, you can't cast spells. And then supports in your hand are disabled until the beginning of your next turn. So every 3 turns, you can't cast supports. What this means is that there really isn't a great way to reliably remove your opponent's creatures if you're using spells and stuff. So what I really like for this node are supports that stay on the field and destroy your opponent's creatures. So they stay down, and then they have something like when your opponent's creatures attack, exile them, or when your opponent's creatures attack, destroy them. Because once the support is down, it's down, and then you don't have to worry about not being able to cast it anymore. So you're definitely going to want to supplement that with some spells that you can kill things with, just so you've got a little bit more in hand. No pun intended, but yeah. So for newer players, we're going to go ahead and take a look at this. I chose Gideon. I was originally going to make it to Fairy, but I was like, no, pretend that you're doing this with your A New Start account. So all of these cards that I am showing here are cards that I have in my A New Start account. So I figured that would be probably a better way for me to make things for newer players, just since it's a new account and I'm not really like souping it up or anything. So the real thing here is I wanted to make sure that I had some way of creating tokens. And so I've got a lot of synergy around the whole token thing. So Reverent Hoplite is going to create human soldier tokens based on your devotion. And since this is going to be a pretty lengthy fight, you take a look at the deck, it's got a lot of just mono white cards. So you're going to build up your devotion, and the Hoplite is definitely going to get you to those 12 tokens pretty quickly. This card here, Commanding Presence, is going to give your first creature +2/+2 and first strike. And then also, whenever it deals combat damage to your opponent's planeswalker, it's going to create a human soldier token. So with this, you're going to be able to create a token every single turn. And the other really nice thing about this is that you're going to be able to give your first creature first strike. So once you give that thing first strike, you can ideally put Gideon's first on that creature, put Commanding Presence on it, and then ride that to victory, or until Azor uses the third ability or gets the Erasca down. And in that case, ideally, you've got some support removal. So Conclave Tribunal is one of those removal cards. It's going to have Convoke, so it's going to cost less if you've got creatures out, which works really nicely with the tokens. But yeah, it's gonna exile an opponent's creature, which comes in very handy. Gideon's Triumph is the kind of support that I was talking about, where when you play it and you have it down, it's going to go ahead and just destroy one of your opponent's creatures, and then the support itself is destroyed too. I really like Gideon's Triumph. I think it's a great card. There's like slightly better versions of this, but even if you just have this, that's fine. Do not play 2 of the same type of card like this, because they'll both destroy themselves, and they'll just destroy the one creature. So just be careful of that. I threw in Knightly Valor just so that you can give your first creature Vigilance, but I mean, you're also Gideon, so ideally you can use your first, but because of the way that Vigilance works now, your creature won't block unless it doesn't die. So that's kind of nice in that you don't have to worry about playing a creature and then having it just immediately die every time because Knightly Valor is down. But for the most part, the new Vigilance buff or buff change don't like. Court of Calling. All of you guys should have this because it's a Rising Tensions reward thing. So it's one of those daily events. And it's going to help you fetch the Hoplite, or it's going to help you fetch War Oracle. And so War Oracle is an uncommon from Origins. It's going to be a 3/3. It's going to be a 5/5 when it gets the Renown. It's only going to reinforce with 3/3, but it's going to be a lifelinker. So this is going to keep you in the match for longer, especially for these really long matches. For you new people, you're definitely going to want to have some lifelink. It's going to help you a lot. Final Payment is a great removal card. It's very cheap, so you don't have to worry about not being able to cast it with Gideon's terrible mana gains. It's going to destroy a creature, you lose 4 life, but really if you're destroying a creature, it's worth the 4 life. Blessed Light is our support removal. I know if you actually look at this deck, it's all standard except for Blessed Light. I did that on purpose. Even though this is a legacy event, I did go ahead and make the deck predominantly standard. And I did that because newer players have a lot more standard cards than legacy cards. It's pretty hard to get legacy cards as a newer player, so I tried to avoid that, but I just put this one in to emphasize a point. So a lot of white removal is like destroy an enchantment, or destroy an artifact, or destroy an artifact or an enchantment. But you really want to make sure that you have something that destroys an opponent's support, not just an artifact or enchantment, because you really need to be able to get rid of that thaumatic compass, or it's going to cause you a lot of problems. And then the last card is Idyllic Grange. There's a bunch of different things that you can use here that are going to convert to white, but I threw this one in because it's something that ideally something like this you guys have. If you've been playing long enough that you have Dragon's Horde, go ahead and throw that in instead. It's better. It gives you card draw. Better. But yeah, so I'd use something like this. It should be pretty effective, honestly. I mean, it's possible that Azor gets like some crazy cascades and does horrible things to you, but yeah, you're gonna wanna be careful about that. But yeah, that should be pretty effective for you. Now, if you're a more experienced player, not experienced, I guess if you have like basically everything, you're gonna want to probably go with something like this here. Once you get set up, it's game over. Azor really can't do anything about it. Azor doesn't have any support removal, so isn't going to be able to do jack for beans against your Killer Instinct and Starfield of Nyx combo on the field, right? I mean, you get Killer Instinct and it's going to be bringing you Drowner of Hope or Emrakul every turn. Either way, your entire opponent's creature board is going to be disabled permanently. And on top of that, you're going to be making a heck ton of tokens, and you're getting 2 really beefy creatures. So you're going to be getting those 12 tokens down pretty quickly because of Drowner. And then because of the combination of these two, your opponent's really not going to be able to play cards, and they're doomed. If they do get creatures down, you've got Settle the Wreckage and Starfield of Nyx. And then you've got Insidious Will with Starfield of Nyx too. So this is just going to be even more badness for your opponent. Remember, you need to cast 4 spells that cost 12 or less. And so Insidious Will and Settle the Wreckage are both supports that are 12 or less. And Narset too. So I'm running Narset in this, even though it's typically what I'll run in PvP just to make it so that Blue Sun Zenith decks don't get me. But I'm really actually just using this one for this -2 ability, since it says pick one of the first 4 non-creature cards from your library and fetch that card. So this is just going to be an additional way to get into something like Killer Instinct or Omniscience, or if your opponent's got a whole bunch of supports down, something like Release the Gremlins. Now, there are a bunch of things like Release the Gremlins that you can use. You don't have to use this one. There's another one from these sets. I think it's called By Force, and that's going to destroy 3 supports also for the exact same 16 mana. I like Release the Gremlins more because it makes those 3 gremlin tokens. I'm honestly not worried about creating the tokens, but just in case, it's going to be able to destroy supports and make tokens. There's also something of the Consulate. It's a white card. Same set, again, that is going to destroy all your opponent's supports. Yeah, Consulate Crackdown. And so these are all really nice. I was thinking like, oh, River's Rebuke would be great for this, but then you don't get rid of Thematic Compass, and that card is a pain in the butt. So this is a really well-rounded deck. It's going to complete all the objectives. It's effectively impossible for you to lose. Like, seriously, it's like impossible. And because you're just going to be spamming Karns first to get your pieces, you're going to get all your pieces really, really darn quickly. So the deck is really straightforward, and it just wins. That's it. This is the best control deck I've ever played, by the way. Release the Gremlins in PvP I'd swap out, but yeah, fantastic deck. Now, let's say that you can't make either of these 2 decks. What do you want to do for this node? So, the real key is you go into your collection, and you're going to need to figure out what you have that makes tokens if you're trying to achieve the objectives. If you're just trying to win the fight, you really just want to make sure that you have stuff that can destroy supports. So check out what you have that's going to destroy supports. And so you could just type in destroy support, and it's going to give you a whole bunch of options. Most of the stuff that destroys supports are spells. White is really good for destroying supports. Red is pretty good for destroying supports. Green has some pretty good options. Blue does not. Blue does not have very many good options for destroying supports. And black is just no. So my suggestion is naturally use a white walker, and then get rid of your opponent's supports with that. If you can play something, if you have something like By Force, it's really nice just because there are only 3 supports in your opponent's deck, so it's kind of guaranteed to destroy all of your opponent's supports, unless they somehow have Thematic Compass in both forms, but it's really unlikely. So this gives you just an incredible amount of control. If you don't have that kind of stuff, having a board wipe like the Great Aurora is really nice because it's going to get rid of all of your opposing creatures and supports on. I mean, it gets rid of yours too, but that's okay. The next thing I would do after you've secured that destroy support, make sure that you've got your gem converters. Make sure that you have something that's going to make you tokens. So go ahead, type in token, see what you have that makes tokens. Ideally, you have something that makes tokens plural and recurring tokens plural. So like there's a bunch of great options for this. If you've been building out your Origins collection, something like Thopter Spy Network is going to put in some mad work. Sandworm Convergence is fantastic. If you've got it, it's a legacy card. Makes big worms. They kill things. And that's it. If you've got any of like the new Vanguards that make supports, your battery is going to die. So like the new Elspeth is going to make 3 tokens a turn. You can use something like that. You can use the Nissa one that makes tokens, but if you're using those, unless you're depending on what you're depending on which one of those things you're running, you're gonna want to make sure that you have a way to destroy the support. So you put those two together, you pick your Planeswalker, and you go from there. So ideally, you've got some kind of Planeswalker that's going to be pretty good for you. I really like Planeswalkers that help end the game in some way. So yeah, that's really what it comes down to. So make sure you've got support removal, make sure you've got some way of gaining life, and you should be pretty good on this particular node. Ideally, you've got, like I said earlier, supports that can destroy creatures or creatures that destroy creatures. So if you have like a Trotta or something, that's another good one. I suppose I should show something like that, right? Like a Trotta. So if you have a creature that can destroy creatures every turn, then that'll serve you pretty well too, right? So a Trotta can swing and kill. So I hope this helped you out, and I'll see you in the next one.